All right, so y'all go ahead and do the factoring and the math knowledge question for today. Pause the video, and then once everyone is finished, you can unpause the video and I'll go over the correct answers. So for the factoring, you should have x minus 3 times x minus 1. For the math knowledge question, we want to average 90 on our 5 tests. So 85 plus 98 plus 92 plus 77 plus our 5th test, when you divide them all by 5, are going to need to equal 90. And so if you add 85 plus 98 plus 92 plus 77, you're going to get 352 plus x, and divide by 5 is going to need to equal 90. So we can cross multiply, and 5 times 90 is equal to 450. And so if you subtract 450 minus 352, you're going to get that x needs to be a 98. So that's what we need on our test. Okay? We're looking at lesson 14 today. We're going to be looking at sine, cosine, and tangent. Then we're going to look at angles of elevation and depression. We're going to look at rectangular and polar coordinates. And then we're going to look at coordinate conversion. So sine, cosine, and tangent should be familiar from Algebra 2 and Geometry. Angles of elevation and depression we covered in Geometry. And then rectangular and polar coordinates you covered a little bit in Algebra 2 and Geometry, but we're going to spend more time going over those. So sine is always opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is always adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent is always opposite over adjacent. So this book says Oscar had a heap of acorns. One Algebra 2 textbook says Arthur had a hold on Arthur. Oscar had a hold on Arthur. It's the first letter of the words. O is for opposite, H hypotenuse, A adjacent, H hypotenuse of is the opposite, and then the acorns is the adjacent. You can make up whatever you want for a memory device. It doesn't matter to me. Some people use SOHCAHTOA. You may have heard that one before. Some old hippie called another hippie tripping on acid is one. I don't care how you learn it, but you need to learn your sine, cosine, and tangent. They are going to be vital to your success this year. So if y'all need to pause the video to write those down, y'all can. We're going to move on now. So we're going to find A and B, and we're going to use sine, cosine, or tangent. So if we use the sine of 36, that's going to be opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine of 36 is going to equal opposite, which is B, over your hypotenuse, which is 6. And then we can multiply by 6 on both sides of the equation. And so you're going to use your calculator. And so I'm going to go over how to use the calculator here. The first thing, whenever you're using sine, cosine, and tangent, you need to go to mode. It's right here next to the blue button. And you need to make sure that it is not on radians. So if it's dark on radians, that's not what you want. So you're going to go down until it's flashing on radians, and then you're going to go to the right so that it's flashing on degrees. Once it's flashing on degrees, you'll hit enter. And so now, do you see how it's dark on degree? So if I go back to mode, it's dark on degree, which is what we want. Okay, so you always need to check that, because some people need the calculators to be in radians and some need them in degrees. And you don't know if someone's messed with it since you borrowed it last. So we're going to do 6 and then sine of 36. And that would give you, we're going to round to 2 decimal places. So 3.53 for your B value. Okay. And then we're going to do our A value. So let's try cosine. If I do cosine of 36, that would give me adjacent over hypotenuse, so A over 6. So again, I'm going to multiply by 6 to get the A by itself. And so if I go to my calculator, I'm going to do 6 cosine of 36. I'm going to get 4.85 for my A. Okay, so that's how you can use your calculator to find those. On this one, we wouldn't have wanted to use tangent. The reason you wouldn't want to use tangent is opposite over adjacent, which would be B over A. And we don't have B or A when we first start off. And then just in case we had messed up finding B or A, we don't want to use this because then our other value would be wrong. So you can use it. It's not wrong. It could lend itself to where you get both of them wrong if you get one of your variables wrong. So I try to avoid doing that if I can. But it's not wrong if you had used tangent after you found either A or B. Okay, so we're going to look at another example where we find angle M and side X. So we can start off by finding our side by using Pythagorean theorem. So 3 squared plus x squared equals 7 squared. So 9 plus x squared equals 49. So that means that x squared would equal 40. And if you take the square root, you'll get the square root of 40, which if you simplify, 40 factors as 4 and 10, which is 2 and 2 and 2 and 5. So we can pull out that pair of 2's, and then we're left with 10 on the inside. So that would be your x value. Now to find your m. We have the opposite and the hypotenuse, so we're going to want to use sine. So the sine of angle M is equal to 3 over 7. The way that we're going to find M, we are going to switch the M and the 3/7. So the sine inverse of 3 over 7 is equal to M. So when you switch these two, you have to do the inverse. So the way that you plug this into your calculator, if you look at the sine button, very close to it should be sine inverse, and it's sine to the -1. So if you're not using a graphing calculator, you should see sine inverse somewhere near where you are to find sine. So on this one, we're going to hit the blue button, the second, and then sine, because the sine inverse is in blue. And then we're going to do 3 over 7. And then you hit enter. And it gives us our angle of 25.38 degrees. So M equals 25.38 degrees. So that's how that works. Again, hopefully some of that is review from either Algebra 2 or Geometry. Now we're going to be looking at angles of elevation and depression. Your angles of elevation and depression are always measured from the horizontal line. So elevation, if you elevate, you're going to look up. Elevators, they go up, they can go down too, but they elevate. And then depression, when you're sad, your head goes down. Depression, you look down. If there is a depression in your skull, there's a little indentation. It's like caved in. So elevation, you go up. Depression, you go down. So we have a 6-foot tall man. So one's like this. You probably want to draw a picture. And we have a tree. So here's our man. And he is 6 feet. And then we have a tree. And he is 200 feet away from the tree. And then he measures the angle of elevation to the top of the tree as 11 degrees. Now, since they told us how tall he was, we are going to actually start the angle of elevation at his top of his head. If they hadn't told us how tall the man was, then we would start it at his feet. We would ignore how tall he was. But since they told us his height was 6, we start at the top of his head. And we want to know what is the height here. Okay, so we have a triangle. and it's a right triangle. And so the base is the same as the 200 because they're the same distance away. And then we're going to be looking for this height. And then this angle is the 11 degrees. So we have our opposite and our adjacent. So that's going to be using tangent. So tangent of 11 is equal to h over 200. So we can multiply by 200 on both sides of our equation. And so our h, if we plug it into our calculator, you'll have 200 tangent of 11 equals 38.88. But that's only from here to the top. The rest of this down here is 6 feet because that's how tall the man is. So if you add 6 to this, your height of the tree would be 44.88 feet. So that would be your answer for that one. We're going to look at another one with an airplane. So again, I draw a picture, and here's my airplane. It's a lovely airplane, I know. We have an altitude of 3,000 feet, and we have an angle of depression of 26 degrees. So when we go down, this angle here is 26 degrees. What is the slant range from the airplane to whatever object we have? So one way is to find this angle over here. These two are complementary. They add up to 90. So this angle would be 64 degrees. The other way would be to use this triangle here. And then this is 3,000. And either way, you're going to be looking for this hypotenuse here. So you can either use sine or cosine depending on which triangle you use. I'm going to do the green one, and that would be using sine. So the sine of 26 is equal to 3,000 over x. If you had used the black, you would do cosine of 64 equals 3,000 over x. You'll still get the same answer. It's just using a different ratio. So we need to multiply by x on both sides of your equation so that you have x times sine of 26 equals 3,000. And then to solve for x, you're going to need to divide by sine of 26. So when we plug that into our calculator, we're going to do 3,000 and then divide it by sine of 26. And then if you hit enter, you should get 6,843.52. So that would be the slant range of your airplane to the object. Okay? So now we're going to look at rectangular and polar coordinates. This is an ordered pair, 3, -4. You would start at the origin and then go right 3 and then down 4. You can also write it like this. This is in vector notation. So 3i, and there's a little caret above it that may be hard to see, but this is in vector notation. They both mean that you go 3 in the x direction and then -4 in the y direction. So those are called carets. That's how you spell that word, C-A-R-A-T. Another method for locating a point on a coordinate plane is using polar coordinates, which uses a distance and an angle. Your positive angles are always measured counterclockwise from the positive x-axis. So you always start here and you go counterclockwise whenever you're measuring positive angles. Your negative angles are measured clockwise. So negative angles are going to go down like that. So if we have 6 at 50 degrees, this is the way that we're going to write it. We're not going to write it like this, but you could. The distance is 6, and then the direction is 50 degrees. So it's a positive 50. So start on the positive x side and go forwards 50 degrees. You could also say negative 310. If this is 50, this total circle is 360. So if we wanted to go backwards, we would need to go backwards 310 degrees, and so it would be negative because we were going down. So that is the same point. You can write it in 2 different ways. We can also make our distance a negative. So if it had been a negative 6 at negative 130 degrees, negative 130, you would go down, and that would put you here. And then if it's a negative number for your distance, you always shoot it through 180 degrees of the origin. So instead of being in the 3rd quadrant, we would be back into the 1st quadrant. So this is the same point as 6 at 50 or 6 at negative 310. And then you actually have one more way that you could write it. We could go a positive 230 degrees. This part is 180, and then this rest is 50 degrees. And so these are vertical angles here. And then if it's a negative, we shoot it through the origin to make it a positive distance. So whenever you're putting them into polar coordinates, you can actually write it in 4 different ways. So we are going to convert this to polar coordinates, and they want us to write it in all 4 forms. So we're going to do 2 examples of these, and some people get these right off, and some people have trouble with these. So feel free, as you're working through your homework, to come back and rewatch this part of the video as you're working through them and having trouble getting them right. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to draw your coordinate and then put negative 3, positive 2 on your graph. So that's a right triangle. We always need to find our hypotenuse and our angle here. So we're going to use Pythagorean theorem to find our hypotenuse. So 2 squared plus 3 squared is going to equal our hypotenuse squared. So our hypotenuse squared is going to equal 13. So our hypotenuse is going to equal the square root of 13. And then to find our angle, we're going to do tangent of our angle. This is theta. It's a Greek letter. It's what people usually use for angle. You don't have to use it, but that's typically what books use. And then opposite over adjacent, so 2 over 3. To find an angle, you're going to have to do tangent inverse of 2/3. So if you plug that into your calculator, you should get 33.69 degrees. So the first one, I'll say we're going to have one that is positive square root of 13 with a positive angle. And so we need to always start at the positive x-axis and go this direction. So this is 180 degrees, but we didn't go the full 180 degrees. We're missing whatever theta is. So if we do 180 minus what we got for our theta, that's going to mean that we go forward 146.31 degrees. That's the distance from here over to here. Okay? We can also have a square root of 13, but we can have a negative angle. So the negative angle would be starting here and going this direction. So this would be 180 degrees, and then we would need to go forward theta amount. So you would do 180 and then plus your theta value. And that would give you 213.69 degrees. These two angles should always equal 360 degrees because together they make a full circle. Okay? The other way that you can do it is to have a negative square root of 13. And so you're going to have one that has a positive angle and one that has a negative angle. So if we're dealing with the negative square root of 13, well, let me do that in black, actually. We were over here in the second quadrant, so we're going to push it through over to here. So this would be the negative square root of 13. If this is theta, this angle here is still theta. So if we go positively, we're going to come all the way around here to here. And so we went almost a whole circle, but we didn't go this theta part. So we would do 360 minus theta, which would give us 326.31 degrees. And then we could have gone negatively, and so that would just be going down, and that's going to be whatever theta equals. And so that's going to be negative 33.69 degrees. And if you take the absolute value of these two, they should also add up to 360. So those add up to 360 if you take the absolute value of them, and then these will add up to 360 as well. So those are the four forms of this point. So on your test, you would have to have all four of these correctly put together to make it right. If you had square root of 13 and then this number here instead of a negative, it would be wrong. You have to have it exactly like this. You always have positive, 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 negative, negative, positive, and negative, negative. So you always have those four sets. Okay, we're going to look at one more. If y'all feel like you can do this by yourself, then go for it. If not, I'm going to go over it, okay? So this is going backwards. So they give it to you in rectangular form, and then you have to convert it to polar. They give it to you in polar form, and you have to convert it to rectangular form. So negative 250 degrees, 253 degrees, you're going to go down because it's negative. This puts you at 90 degrees. That puts you at 180. And if we go forward, this would be 270. So we're somewhere in the second quadrant. And so the difference is going to be 253 minus 180. So this angle here is going to be 73 degrees. Okay? So this was the 180, and then we had to go another 73 to get to 253. You're not ever going to want to put it to the y-axis. We do not want this angle here. Okay? That's usually the part that people mess up on, is just finding the wrong angle. All right, so the 13 is our hypotenuse, and it's a negative 13. We don't want to have a negative hypotenuse length. That doesn't make sense. So we have to push it through the origin, and then we draw our new right triangle. So now our hypotenuse is a positive 13, and this angle is still 73 degrees because they are vertical. And it's okay if it's not to scale. And then we use sine and cosine to find our x and y values. So if I do the sine of 73, that's going to be y over 13. So I'm going to multiply by 13 on both sides. And that'll give you 12.43. And then if you use cosine, you're going to have x over 13. So again, multiply by 13 on both sides. And that'll give you, x equals 3.80. And so the way that you write your answer, we went to the right. So that's a positive x value. And then we went down. So that's a negative y value. And so that would be it in rectangular form. Okay, so some of y'all may have used r and u. So you may have had 3.8r minus 12.43u. Some Algebra 2 books do that. It's the same concept, but we're not using R and U's. We're using I and J. So don't do this method here. Use the I and the J. They're in alphabetical order. I, J, X, Y. Okay, so your homework, you do get to omit number 22. So make sure to do the other questions tonight so we can go over any problems that you have tomorrow.